Just going to show you the menu settings I use for the Canon 30D. Still a great camera to buy. I got this one for £77. I've done a short video about it. But I just thought, I still use it at weddings. It's a backup body, but also use it with the 50mm 1.8, and I exclusively use it in manual mode, starting at 200 shutter speed, 1/200th of a second, 5.6 and 200 ISO for all the outside work. So I just thought I'd show you through the menus and just so you can see what I use. So I shoot RAW and a large JPEG because I actually still like looking at the original JPEGs out of these cameras. They're usually very good quality and the colour's really good. So yeah, I shoot a RAW and a large JPEG. Mainly use Lightroom 100% really now. So, you know, RAW files are the main one I edit. Red eye I turn off because I don't use the on-camera flash anyway. So that's turned off. I turn the beep off because I work in churches, but obviously if you want the focus beep, so when you get focus, you can have a highlight of red around the focus point and a beep, so that might be useful to you, but I switch that off because I don't want any sound. Shoot without card, this is a big one. Now I have this switched off. A lot of people have this switched on. I've seen cameras where it is on, so switch that off. What that really means is if you haven't got a compact flash card in the camera, then you can actually still use the camera, so that's not great if you went on your holidays, you forgot to put your card in and you're taking photos and you don't realise. So I have that switched off, so it just means if there's not a card in the camera, I can't actually use the camera and release the shutter. The aperture exposure bracketing, probably a different video, that one, but it's not something I would use at weddings. I do use bracketing to produce HDR images, mainly with the 5D, but on the 30D you can bracket your files by a third of a stop, you know, and so that's quite useful. So I'll just show you that. So you can use that for bracketing, but as I say, not something I use a lot of at the moment. Whitebalance Shift I don't get involved with because my RAW workflow is, I've learnt to completely leave white balance alone and then sort it out in Lightroom. So all the colour balance, everything colour wise is sorted out with the RAW file in Lightroom. If you do want to shift here, just have a play around with that and you can see that you can shift magenta, green, blue, whatever you want to do really, but that's not something I suggest you get involved with if you're just starting out. Custom white balance, you can read into that. Again, something I don't use because white balance is taken care of later on with the RAW file. I leave white balance to software later on, so yeah, custom white balance is not really relevant to me. Right, this is one that might be worth setting at 5200, and the reason I do that is because sometimes I do want to force the white balance, and you know, if you've got, say, a church and you've been in there and you've set it exactly 4100 and you know that church is 4100K, then that might be useful. I've done this before, just so that you get a good colour readout on the screen more than anything. As I say, white balance is sorted out later on, but just so that your JPEG looks good, I ping the JPEG across to a Wi-Fi card, so and then it comes across to my phone as a backup. So, you know, that might be useful to you. I have it preset 5200K, just so I know if I was to jog it went over to K, I'm still okay. How many Ks can you say? Don't worry too much about that one at the moment. So color space sRGB, you can go on forever about this and comment below. Adobe RGB, sRGB with your RAW file. This is not imprinting that color profile set in stone, so don't worry too much. You can set it later on when you export to a JPEG from your RAW file. But sRGB, maybe I want to just send off these JPEGs. Say your workflow is a JPEG workflow, which is absolutely fine. You can create great JPEGs out of this camera. When you send that out, just remember an sRGB file can be used for web by every printing company around the world, universally known now, whereas Adobe RGB is a larger colour space. You get subtleties of colour. If you're working with a professional printer, with a large format printer, he might want you to provide an Adobe RGB file as a JPEG. So, you know, this is where you change your colour space, but I don't work in Adobe RGB. I don't print my own work. I send it off to professionals, and I'll give them a raw file as well. So, you know, if you're on a JPEG workflow, this is worth reading about. There's a lot of information out there, but sRGB means that JPEG can be used anywhere. So that's a big tip. This is a big one, neutral. I found with these older cameras, I've used standard and all the different profiles. If you are producing a JPEG, again, this won't affect the raw file. As in, you know, this is really, this menu when you're in neutral, and I'll just go over to this. So if you're in portrait, landscape, standard, this effect will be affecting the JPEG. So just bear that in mind. The reason I use neutral, you've got all zeros, no sharpening, so the file is flat. Now it's something that is very personal, and you know, I suspect the majority of you will like put more punchy images, but as you get into photography more, I've actually gone more neutral over the years. And believe me, when I was about 20, I was very, very much monochrome. And I would have put user define in here, and I'd have put a red filter on my camera. But now, you know, things have calmed down a bit. I like a neutral file out of the camera as a JPEG file, so I can see everything. And you also will affect dynamic range there. So that's a big one. I set that to neutral. Don't worry too much about protect. So I don't use that. Let's just go back up. Custom functions are there, just so that you know, but let's just go back up because I came out. So rotate, obviously you can rotate. Yeah. This will be interesting because this will show you a different custom function and why I have it set like this. I know I'm searching through to get back to show you this, but I'll show you why later on. So you've got print order, transfer order. This doesn't affect me, but when you're looking at printing straight from the camera with the button up here, that will affect you. Autoplay. Review time I want to get to. So I use 8 seconds so that I've got plenty of time to take the picture, review it, and so it doesn't go off the screen and I have to press play again. So the review time is important to me, 8 seconds, so I set that up. AF point display or not display, I want it display, so it's displayed obviously. Histogram, brightness versus RGB. I mainly use brightness. The reference point for me of the histogram is I'm looking for the highlight. So the only thing I'm really interested in is have I blown the highlight. So I purely use the brightness histogram. Don't use the RGB, which, you know, visually is more information to take in when you're doing photography. The idea of my setup is I've crunched it down to absolutely nothing, so I don't have to think about anything at all to do with photography and can concentrate on the people and the images. And phone just ran out of space there, so I've changed phones. Sorry about this little gap. But histogram, yeah, brightness, done that. Auto power off, 30 minutes. Because I'm using the Wi-Fi card, I don't want the camera to turn off really. I want it to be active, so I don't want the power to turn off. This is something we'll use some battery for you, but it's a DSLR, it's only running a screen, so it's been fine like that for me. So I leave it on for 30 minutes. It does eventually, excuse me, turn off. Auto rotate, that is obvious, just leave that on. LCD brightness, I've got this full power just so I can make this video, but generally I would probably be about there, halfway. So it depends where you are, inside or outside, but again, that's personal preference, but I don't have it this bright. So yeah, date, time, very important, obviously. Get that right, because if you're using two bodies, you want them synchronized. Believe me, I've made this mistake at weddings where I've had two 5D bodies, or this 5D and this 30D. Somehow got the time wrong, unfortunately, and then on the timeline it becomes a complete nightmare in Lightroom. So setting your times right on your cameras is very important. File numbering continuous, again a personal one. Different reasons for using different things, but I just use continuous, so it goes up to 999 and then goes back to 1. So that's fine. It's not 999 actually, so I'll have to look into that. But yeah, file numbering, I just use continuous. Language for me is English for this menu. Video system PAL doesn't affect me, so I'm not too interested in that. But you might be if you're plugging this into to view your images. Communication, yeah, there you can set that up, but that doesn't really affect me. So format, that's the big one, and I'm going to go into the custom functions and show you a big warning with this one. Obviously you can format your card. I've never formatted a wedding by accident, touch wood, every bit of wood I can find. Not superstitious much, but it's your biggest nightmare is, will you format this card by banging this camera against you? But yeah, I'll show you that. Obviously I format my cards after the wedding, so you can do it there. We'll come back to custom functions, but let's just go on to clear settings is obvious. Sensor cleaning is to flip the mirror up, so let's have a quick go at that. It's too low, cannot clean sensor, fair enough. But you need a full battery, and you can flip the mirror up and clean your sensor if you're happy to do that. Firmware 104 I believe is the up-to-date one. Comment below if you know there's a better one, or an up-to-date one. I believe that's as far as we can go with the 30D. Right, let's get back to custom functions and just whiz through these. Again, this is literally your custom functions, but I'm just showing you mine and why I've got them set up. Now I use the set button, the center button. I've got that defined so I can get picture styles up. So the set button is a simple push and I can get straight to picture styles. So it's because I use this as a hobby camera as well, to be honest with you, but you know, I can work in monochrome very quickly then. I'm mainly between neutral and monochrome, because this camera makes a very nice black and white straight out of the camera, I can tell you that. So a nice JPEG black and white straight out of the camera is good fun. Not something I would do at a wedding. Obviously I use all colour files and then I would convert to monochrome later on, but as a hobby camera, which I do enjoy using this camera, then that might help you. And you define that in custom functions. Custom functions, number 1 is the set button, and I just say change picture style with the set button. So you can have menu display, and I've just changed it to picture style. So next one is long exposure noise reduction. I leave that switched on. Obviously I want as much help as I can if I was doing long exposures, and it does help a lot, so that's switched on. Flash sync speed in AV mode, I never use AV mode or TV, or you'll never really see me use anything but manual, to be honest with you, when I'm working as a professional photographer, or you know, I point iPhones at things and don't care and make these videos, but the bottom line is I'm working manually pretty much 100% of the time. It's easier, people think it's harder, it's quicker, people think it's slower, but I could go on and on. I convince probably about, I would say 50 to 60% of people that I teach, and they don't go back to AV, but you know, so that's what I'm doing there, using manual mode, so this doesn't affect me at all. If you did want to do that, you can force it and fix it in AV mode to be 1/250th of a second. Slightly faster flash sync speed with this camera than the 5D, so you know, there you go, but it doesn't affect me, so let's come out of there. Shutter AE lock button, AF AE. I could make a whole video on this, just this one custom function, and maybe I will. Comment below if you want me to. I'll be honest with you, this one I have to get the manual out and redo it every single time I do all of these videos, because it's too complicated, and I hate complication with cameras. But this is the basics. I'm only going to show you these two, AE lock AF and AF AE lock. Now I keep it at AF AE lock, and the reason being I use the shutter button to actually autofocus, then I recompose and I fully depress the shutter. So in other words, it's a focus recompose method. If you want to use back button focus, that's AE lock stroke AF. That detaches the autofocus away from the shutter button and puts it, there's a big star on a button at the back of your camera. If you've got your 30D out now, have a look at that, and it's got a star on it, and that's your back button focus. So you can actually use the back button to do the autofocus function, and then you can use the shutter release just for shutter. Now to me, my brain's completely trained. I cannot change. It's impossible for me to ever change now. And believe me, if you can, then well, I don't know how you do it, to be honest with you. The focus recompose method, using the center focus point, is what I use. It's quick, it works, and I'm in manual mode, so it works for me, so that's what I use. But you can have a play around with that and see if you can train yourself to use back button focus, see if it's quicker. AF assist beam, only external flash unit. This has got a flash on it, and it's got this little light that will pop on. Obviously I don't want that happening in churches with brides just about to put a ring on their finger, so that's switched off. Third of stop increments for me, because my way of working, I will show you this, I haven't done a video about it yet, but I've got a particular way of working that I actually invented, and I'll show you that in the future. But it's based on a system of using 50th of a second, 100th of a second, 200th of a second, and 400th of a second. So I like the third of a stop increments. You can go to half stop here, but it mucks my system up for me. Again, it's a personal thing. You've got to start, this is your custom function area, but that's the reason I'm in third of a stop increments, is because I use 200, 400, 800 and 1600 as my shutter speeds, and I'll show you one day. Let's move on. Flash firing, we want it to fire, that's fair enough. ISO expansion I want on, because if I get in a tricky situation, noise does not interest me whatsoever. A, I can get rid of most of it later on, and B, there's way too much talk about noise anyway. Most people are magnifying their noise up to the size of a bus and then talking about noise, so that's my aggressive sort of, I hate everyone that talks about noise, but it's a ridiculous subject to me. Most of these cameras, they're all the same. The higher you go, the worse it's going to get, but you can get rid of it later on, so don't worry too much. Bracket sequence, don't really get involved with bracketing, but if you do, that's where you can get involved with bracketing, which is switch to enable with me, which is 0. Superimposed display is on. That's fine, and this is a big one. So what this means is when you turn your camera off and you were to press the menu button again, would the highlighter, if you like, if your last thing that you selected before you switched it off, would it go back to that? Now I don't want it to, and you'll notice that's why when I do switch the camera off, and I'll switch it back on again and press menu, it always goes back to the quality, which is the top one. That might be a negative. You might think that's a negative, because you could actually then, if this happened in the bag, so you switched it back on and it pressed the menu button, you could alter the quality. But the worst thing that could happen for me is if it went back to format, and this is important. So I don't want it to go back to anything but the top of the menu for me. If it did change the quality, it's not the end of the world, and it wouldn't generally, but if it formatted the card by accident in the bag, that would be a nightmare. So just getting back, it's gone back to the top. Let's get back into custom functions. So this top is where I let it go back to. You can let it go back to previous, and that's when, if you formatted your card and switched the camera off, you could get in a right mess. And it could go straight back to format, and you could potentially just delete everything that you've just been doing. So previous I don't do. There is an argument that you could do this workflow. I'll show you this quick one, where you could actually say, you always leave it on date and time. Then when you switch the camera off and switch it back on again, and you press the menu button, in my system, there you go. So it's back there, and it always stays on date and time. And so you just get in the habit of just putting it, if you change the date and time, is it the end of the world? Well, choose whichever one, it's not the end of the world. You could say that video system is not the end of the world. I hope you're getting my point. This is quite a useful, it's back through again, bear with me, custom function. So this one's quite an important one. I personally have resorted to top, so I leave it at top. Previous top, if power off, is quite obvious, so it go to the previous, but if you switch it off, it goes to the top. So I've gone for top. There you go. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, then just get yourself in the menu and it will. Okay, here we go. Carry on. Mirror lockup. If you've got it on a tripod and you don't want camera shake, you can put it over to disable the mirror flipping up, which is worth doing if you're into nighttime or long shutter speeds. So have a look at that. Not for me. I don't really bother at weddings with things like that. So not for me. AF point selection method normal, multi-controller direct. I don't use any of the focus points except for the center one anyway. It's another thing to think about. I use focus recompose center focus point, so I don't use any of this. But if you do, you can use the multi-controller or the wheel. So there you've got some options there. So normal to me is fine, because that means you have to press a button, then use this joystick. So you have to do a button press first. So I'll just leave it on normal, that one. ETTL evaluative, that's the end of that. If I don't get involved with ETTL at all, so mine's a completely manual flash setup. So if you want to get into that nightmare world of ETTL, which I think you've got to get into it and then get into manual flash at the same time, and then there's pluses and minuses, but for me it's just more of a problem, so I use manual flash for everything. Second curtain just means that the flash will go off at the second curtain, so that you get a trail behind your subject. So I have second curtain. If you want it to go to first curtain, you can read about that, but I suppose that's quite an advanced thing. But for me, if I was going to do something, I'd want the blurry effect to be behind the subject. So there we go, second curtain. Safety shift AV-TV, disable. Don't use AV-TV ever, so I don't know what anybody does. Comment below. I guarantee that you're going to be saying that manual mode is slower, but definitely comment below. So let's go to the next one. Nearly there now. Magnified view, image playback only. That's fine. That was another phone that ran out of storage. Sorry about that. Here we go. So AF stops for a specialist lens, well, not specialist, but in the EF range you'll see some more top-end professional lenses have got a stop button on, so you can stop. Sports photographers use it a lot. I doubt that's going to affect you. So just getting to the last one. Sorry about that. So let's go to the last one. Add original decision data. I never knew what this was, to be honest, and the police use it so you can actually switch this on, and then the images have got something imprinted in the EXIF data that can be read later on to say it's the original file. So they would use this for scenes of crime, I suppose, things like that, so they can use the cameras and prove that these were the original photos and they've not been tampered with. So interesting custom function. So I have that switched off because that's not important to me. Sorry about the gaps in the video, a bit jumpy. Low quality, obviously, phone footage. But I just thought I'd quickly go through that. These phones just allow me to just get these little videos out to you. So I hope that helps you. Obviously, comment below if you've got some better setups or anything about the 30D. And yeah, they're great cameras. I wouldn't be surprised if you're spending £50 on a 30D very soon, which is amazing. I mean, the frames per second, everything about them, the file out there, they're great little SLRs, and they're obviously as good as the day they were built. At least they're solid as rock. So get yourself a 30D, have a play around with it. I guarantee you can eBay it again for probably the same amount of money. So I'm going to look at getting a 40D, maybe a 50D, and we can go through the menus on that. Different menu systems. I owned the 40D for a long time and still wish I had it, so I might get a 40D again, and we'll look at the colours and show you how to set that one up. So I hope that helps, and we'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot.